For Creamer Media's Polity, Mtabi Madiba, constitutional lawyer and writer Lwando Xaso, discusses a book titled Made in South Africa, A Black Woman's Stories of Rage, Resistance and Progress. Your book, Made in South Africa, is a vibrant collection of essays in which you examine some of the events that have shaped your experience in South Africa. So why was it so important to tackle issues through essays?
I think everyone has their own way of reflecting on events. Some people do podcasts, some people do long form essays, and some people can even, get a little bit more creative and do novels and that kind of thing. And I think the easiest way for me to reflect is through short essays that I feel that people can find relatable and accessible, especially. And it started at around 2013. I was given the opportunity to contribute on Daily Maverick. And I think with practice and with time, it just became an instinct that I didn't even have to think about it, that it just flowed naturally. And that is my preferred way of communication. I think I express myself best when I'm writing and I have time in between words to think about the words I want to use and to be more intentional with what I want to say. And I think writing is a bit hard because it does require some kind of precision rather than, talking. Talking, we can just shoot straight. You don't have to think that much. Sometimes your hand gestures can fill in the blanks, that kind of thing. With writing, people sometimes assume a lot in between the lines and in between the words because you're not there. They can't see your facial expression as you're writing. So they fill in the blanks for themselves. So you have to take responsibility of not being misunderstood because people can't see your disposition. So it requires you to think a bit more. So that's why I did it in the form of essays. It's just my preferred way.
And racism in South Africa is widely regarded as an ongoing problem. Since the demise of apartheid, it remains a societal and institutionalized problem. So please explain to us, what does racism mean to you as an individual?
I've been telling everyone that one of the books I read this year that really impacted me a lot is a book called Caste by Isabel Wilkerson, who is or used to be a New York Times journalist. And she talks about racism within the definition of what caste is. And caste is about hierarchy. It's how we expect the world to work, who's on top and who's at the bottom. And she speaks of caste as being the bones of the system and racism as the flesh and blood. So for me, what racism is a form of a caste system. There's a hierarchy that we've created to say that if you have these particular features, if you have this particular gender or this particular skin color, then you are subordinate and you are inferior. And if you have these other features, skin color and gender, then you are superior. And I think what caste does is that, or racism, is something that reinforces itself. So it's something that even if someone is not racist to you directly, it's a message that you really pick up in the subtle ways and not so subtle ways in which the world works, that confirms that your position is at the bottom. And if you want anything, you're going to have to fight so hard for it to break the stereotypes or to break the caste beliefs that people have. It's something that can frame a person's entire life, right? From where you go to school, where you live, where you work, and who you marry. Do you marry someone from your own caste or outside of the caste, and all those things. So race, even though it's as we all know, a socially constructed thing, we have made it a reality because we believe it. And I think part of me writing about racism or certain racist incidents is me asserting through my writing that I don't believe it. In as much as I can't say I've gotten to a point where I can completely say that it doesn't affect me. Yes, it does affect me, but I will continue writing as a form of making sure that I don't buy into it. So part of writing is taking myself out of that thinking. It's reprogramming my brain and restoring my brain into its native form before it received all these messages that we are inferior, that other people are superior, that I'm not deserving, that I'm not worthy, and all those things. So it's a deeply personal thing. It's a political thing. It's a socio-political thing. But when it's experienced personally, it's particularly traumatic. I think understanding it intellectually is one thing, but feeling it through an incident that happens to you, it can be life-changing.
And you experienced racism on the day of Goodwill in 2014 in Port Elizabeth while on the queue to buy ice cream. Briefly take us through what transpired on that day.
So in the book, there's an essay called Soft Serve Racism, and I talk about how after Christmas, it's part of our family tradition to go to the beach, and on this particular day, before going to the beach, we went to an ice cream store, and we got in. There weren't a lot of people because, it's a public holiday, and there were some Black people in front of us, and it was us. And the guy who was serving the ice cream was actually a man of Indian descent. And he was about to serve the people in front of us when a group of white people came in. And he sort of abandoned the queue and went straight to them and asked them what they need. And he served them first. At that point, I'm observing all of this and I'm like, there must be an explanation, because it can't be that this person has abandoned the next customer who's Black, and then after them it would have been us to serve white people. Why is that? So I asked, and he ignored me. So then I spoke to the white customers and I'm like, there's a queue here, so do you mind waiting for your turn and wait behind me? And they said no, it's not their fault that they were being served before us. And then I realized that it was a racial situation and that the man of Indian descent wasn't going to get involved. So I ended up having an altercation with a verbal one with the white customers. And it became clear that there was racial tension because they didn't want to wait their turn. And one of the things that they said that made it clear to me that it was a racial thing was that Black people are taking all the jobs. So he was basically saying that, what is it to you if you have to wait in line for this one thing? You guys are already first in line in this new South Africa. Let us enjoy this one privilege that we still have. And for me, I think it really affected me because no one else in the store seemed to be bothered by this except for me and my aunt. The Black customers in front of us didn't want to be, engaged in the chaos that I was causing. The man of Indian descent barely looked at me. He was dutifully going about his business and making sure that the white people got their ice cream. He didn't even look at me when I asked him for an explanation. So for me, it was just a moment of feeling powerless, and also realizing that out of all the racist incidents that could occur to me, that is not the most traumatic one. But I don't take for granted that that should not have happened. It shouldn't have happened to anyone. And also, it made me relate more to people who experience that more often, and realizing that even though I'm a constitutional lawyer, there was nothing I could do to defend myself in that moment. They got their ice cream, they left, and we were left there with those lousy circumstances of feeling inferior, So I write about that incident and just the powerlessness of that moment, because I'm known as someone who preaches the ideals of the Constitution. I'm a lawyer, so I'm all about recourse. But in that moment, my aunt could tell that my words could not prevent that from happening to us.
And you mentioned that you were left with a lot of unanswered questions about what happened in the aftermath of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission after you visited the Apartheid Museum. Why was this the case?
I've been to the Apartheid Museum a number of times. As you know, it's quite a big exhibition, and I think you can't take it all in one visit. So, I periodically go, and this particular visit, I ended up in the part of the exhibition that details the TRC, and you can listen to the testimonies of the hearings. And I don't know if you have listened to the TRC hearings, but it brings you back, crashing back down to earth, right? The kind of pain is a kind of pain that, I can't even imagine going through some of the things that the people who were sharing their stories went through, and still wanting to be part of this country, or still being interested in remaking it or being part of the new South Africa. So I was listening to a particular testimony. It was a story based in Port Elizabeth, and my extended family is from Port Elizabeth. So it hit close to home. I understood what the mother was saying in her testimony. It was really, really heartbreaking. And the museum is set up that as you walk out of the TRC hearing part of the exhibition, you then walk into the new South Africa, and that you see the flag and you hear the national anthem playing, and you're supposed to feel good. And it's like the two don't connect. We can't go from that kind of pain to the flag and our new national anthem. It's like there's something in the middle that is missing. After people sought the truth, I needed to know, what did they get in return? Once you know that your son was killed so brutally, was burnt until there was nothing but ashes left of him, how do you move on from that? How does your country help you move on from that? What are you owed? What is due to you? So after I listened to that woman's story, I had to find out, what did she get? So that took me to the whole thing of investigating what happened with the TRC, how many people got to tell their stories, how many people made submissions, how many people actually gave evidence, and how many people were given reparations. And for me, it just made me realize there's a crucial step in our transformation that is missing. We can never be truly free until there's been some compensation, some repair work, some reparative work. And sadly, what I found out that it has hardly been done. So I owed it, after I listened to those stories, I owed it to myself and to my country and to the victims of apartheid and I consider myself a victim of apartheid to some extent, but I think it's a matter of degrees. But I owed it to Simpiwe Mtimkulu's family to find out what happened to him, to read the entire testimony. And then I owed it to them to try and write about it, to say, we haven't forgotten. I've now come to know what has happened to your son, and I want to tell as many people as I can. And I also want to tell people that you haven't gotten reparations. And how can we move on as a country when we know that certain people have been violated in that way by apartheid and they haven't been given reparations? It's just an injustice that we'll never be able to get around. It will always haunt us.
And you also write that the value of Zapiros' criticism of an important matter has been lost owing to the comparison of Black officials with non-humans. So what value can be derived from this?
So that essay on Zapiros' art, as you know, he's a satirist, and he is a very important figure in our constitutional democracy. I think the work that he does through satire is very important. It has elicited very important conversations, but I do think that there's a line. And in this particular incident, when he compared the officials of the National Prosecuting Authority, officials that I'm also frustrated with, and some of them I don't even respect, I just thought he crossed the line when he compared them to Homo naledi, and almost saying that they're subhuman. And if you look at the illustration and you don't even know Homo naledi, you would think that Zapiro is comparing them to apes, because the drawing itself objectively looks like one of an ape. And basically what I was saying in that cartoon, that I don't believe that there are a lot of moral absolutes in life, but what is a moral absolute, even for artists, even for creatives who are given a lot of room to make commentary in our constitutional democracy. We are not about censorship. We are about talking truth to power at all times, right? But I think there's nothing a person can do that will earn them a comparison to a subhuman or an animal. So we're basically saying, in as much as your work has strengthened our constitutional democracy, we are drawing a line and saying that in criticizing people, especially Black people, by the virtue of you being white, there's certain comparisons you are not allowed to make because they are rooted in racism. We know that Black people, in order to be seen as inferior, were almost deemed subhuman or ape-like. And that then facilitates the violation and the oppression if people believe that about them. So we're saying that at this moment, after everything we've been through, there's no way we can let that go unnoticed and not check it, even if it's Zapiro and someone that we do respect.
Please talk to us about why you felt that your presence during Zuma Must Fall March was comforting to white guilt.
The Zuma Must Fall March on the 7th of April, 2017, it was something that was very important for me to participate in order to express my deep, deep disappointment in Zuma and his supporters and his cabinet and even the ANC that propped him up. Because I think the way that Zuma led this country has been detrimental, and we'll see the consequences of his leadership for years to come. So I knew that I wanted to march, and so many people did. It wasn't just me. One of the reasons I'm proud to be a South African is that we don't sit on the sidelines. We really give our politicians a hard time, and rightfully so. And I think we really put Zuma under pressure, in a way that the US didn't even do with Donald Trump, like at every corner, we were trying to contain Zuma until he stepped down. And I was very, very proud to see South Africans saying, again, there's a line you cannot cross. We will not allow you to cross this line. We will not allow you to destabilize our constitutional democracy, right? There's so many things that you have mismanaged. That's even putting it very lightly. And I think we were really the protectors, of our constitution. And on the other side, even though I felt so much pride and inspiration, on the other side, a part of me was able to see that march as something a little bit more complicated than people coming together, as one for a particular goal. I just saw that it was opportunistic for certain people to ask Zuma to step down, as if they don't have power to give up themselves. And it became a talking point with white people because they thought, in order to deflect from what they owe the country, we will focus on Zuma. And for me, it's like today's agenda is Zuma, but let's not forget there's a slew of other issues that we need to contend with. And at the core of those issues are, white people giving up their white privilege, giving up their power that they have not earned. And that's the more difficult conversation than Zuma Must Fall. What does a march against white privilege look like? And would they be as receptive? And would they step down? No one ever gives up power, but there we were asking Zuma to give it up, And it just made me realize it was a moment. I was very skeptical whether we can sustain the unity to other issues. That also makes sense, that there's been a violation, there's been a transgression, there needs to be some compensation, but people can't follow that maths, but they can follow that Zuma violated and plundered the country. He needs to step down. And, that's a simpler equation for them rather than the bigger issues that still plague us today.
And what impact do you think the coronavirus pandemic has had on the previously disadvantaged people?
It has compounded the disadvantage. I think that, and I don't like being anyone's spokesperson, this is just having a whole spectrum of people within my own family who've been affected disproportionately to me. So knowing that people who are trying to claw themselves out of a particular situation, people who are trying to better their lives or to just move the needle. The coronavirus just came and kicked us all in the shins. And some of us can get up much quicker than others because we've got the resources too. And other people just can't find, the strength to be able to get up. And I don't blame them because it made an already hopeless situation even more hopeless in certain circumstances. But it's also been quite something watching, the coronavirus create opportunities for people and watching people being creative The first mask that I ever bought was actually from someone who decided that they're going to start their own business of sewing masks and sell them and that kind of thing, and taking initiative. And I think that for me, watching some of the people in my life who are reliant on the tourism industry and having, that industry basically shut down in that way. I think what's important to know is that it doesn't affect one person, it affects families, right? And sometimes it affects generations. And it's been a very tragic time, even seeing the job losses and all of that. And I'm the kind of person that if my fellow citizens are not doing well, I'm not okay. So I don't care if my job hasn't been affected or my life is still fine, because we are only stronger if everyone else is, as we've seen through the virus. So our economy can only be strong if we make sure that there's more investment in South Africa, there's more job creation. The more that people are doing well, it just creates a stronger base for the country. So for me, it's just, I think coronavirus has devastated a lot of people, and not just in South Africa, around the world. And I think it's just a time for compassion. And I think it's a time, I was actually hoping that even within government, it would be a time for unity, it would be a time for solutions, and it would be a time where all other matters can be put to the side. So when you see racism come up during the pandemic, when you see corruption come up during the pandemic, it's like, how much more can we take? So it's been quite surreal living through this and just seeing all the hope that we had at the beginning of the year, and see all our plans being dashed. And I can't imagine what it feels like to be someone like President Ramaphosa, who probably came in thinking this is my plan for the country and all of that, and having to change all of that because of things beyond his control. So I appreciate the difficulties that it has presented, but at the same time, I'm hoping that our leaders can actually work together to especially create jobs, strengthen the economy. I just want to see South Africa move into a more prosperous chapter.
And lastly, this week the nation will observe the 16 days of activism for no violence against women and children campaign, and 5 days of mourning to remember those who lost their lives due to COVID-19 and gender-based violence. What message do you have for the nation?
I think, first of all, a message for the nation is always a hard thing to articulate, but to share my thoughts, and not to say that I know any better than other people. It's just recognizing that we have a serious, serious issue of violence in our country, and it's not out of nowhere. It's not surprising. It goes back to what I was saying about the TRC, that if a country has been traumatized and terrorized in the way that we were under apartheid, you just don't move on to the next chapter and build a new country. There's a lot of transitional stuff that needs to happen to make sure that the new thing that we're building is built on solid ground. And we've taken some shortcuts, and we're seeing the consequences of that. And I think when it comes to the violence that we see today, it's because we haven't fully processed the fact that our country was founded on violence. It was founded on war. It was founded on terrorism. Racism, apartheid was a very violent regime. When a government is violent, it creates violent people. That violence seems to be a part of our DNA. And we need to not just create laws and policies against gender-based violence. We don't need to just be intellectual about it. Yes, we need to bring awareness, but there's something about how do we change people's hearts? How do we change our DNA? How do we understand violence and why violence occurs? How do we, in a more holistic and meaningful way, really work towards creating a society that is less violent? And for me, that's a lot of hard work. It's not government work. it's not fully government work, but it's something about community work. How we living in community with one another. I think growing up, I did feel a sense of accountability in communities. I did feel a sense of love and protection in communities. And now, when I go back to my neighborhood in Port Elizabeth, where my aunt stays, it feels a little bit more disconnected. It feels like everyone is just in their own houses doing their own thing. And I think that part of that disconnection is that we are never going to tackle the violence that is a part of us. And I don't have the solutions other than to say that those who are in leadership positions cannot afford to be violent, whether in language or in deed. They need to start showing more love amongst themselves, more respect, more decorum, and give us something to emulate. There's a certain way that they need to conduct themselves and to model what community looks like, even in disagreement, that will then help us, the citizens, to see what that looks like in the same way that I think and I know Nelson Mandela modeled that for us in the 90s, and someone like Archbishop Tutu, who spoke about love, who spoke about respect, Ubuntu, and community. We need more of that language, in our politics. Right now, it's just combative all the time. Everyone is guarding their position. It's literally like a war. And I think it's creating a more tense society, therefore a more violent society. So I think there's something that leaders and government and business across the sphere, leaders of families, of communities, there's something that they can do to model behavior of respect and of Ubuntu and of love that we can all emulate and hopefully start the journey to, changing our DNA.
That was Lwando Xaso speaking to Creamer Media's Polity about Made in South Africa, a Black woman's stories of rage, resistance, and progress.